As far as the question of immigration is concerned, we can summarize with just a few key details. First of all, Obama was unable to deliver on comprehensive immigration reform. That was something that he talked about on the campaign trail, but that he was unable to see into legislation once he had been elected president. In that, he is by no means unique. As you see, the first point on the slide here, like all presidents since Ronald Reagan, he was unable to deliver immigration reform. So this quest for comprehensive immigration reform is something that has been ongoing since the 1980s, and the inability to achieve comprehensive immigration reform says more about the political hostilities between the two parties and the inflexibility of the two parties to arrive at any sort of compromise on this issue than it does about Obama himself. When we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, basically we're talking about a compromise that gives the Republicans the border security that they want, that they promise to their electorate, and that gives the Democrats the path to citizenship for people who have arrived on American soil illegally, and certain provisions of amnesty for such people. Uh, Typically, those are the things that the Democrats are going to focus upon, while typically the Republicans are going to focus on heightened border security, regulation of illegal immigration. Uh, the Trump border wall plan is simply the most, how should we say it, the most over the top, the most extravagant manifestation of this Republican emphasis on border security. The last comprehensive immigration reform came in the mid 1980s when a Democratic Congress and a Republican President, Ronald Reagan, worked out a compromise on exactly these terms. We increased border security, we put new controls over the hiring of illegal immigrants as workers, and on the other hand, we provide amnesty and we provide paths to citizenship for people who are already on American soil. Okay. So that's the sort of immigration reform that Obama had hoped to achieve and that never came to pass. He had basically 2 years in which he had a Congress that might have been able to deliver such immigration reform for him. And as we've already seen in the context of healthcare and the economy, Obama's focus was not on immigration reform in these 2 years. The focus was on economic recovery, the stimulus package, and then healthcare, Obamacare. By the time Barack Obama was ready to engage with the question of immigration reform, he had lost Congress. He had not only lost Congress, but he had lost Congress convincingly to the most extreme wing of the Republican Party in many of these races, the Tea Party Republicans. And he didn't have enough partners for any sort of negotiation across the aisle. So he had lost Congress, but he had lost Congress convincingly and to people who had used opposition to illegal immigrants as part of their approach in their campaigns in many cases. As a result, what was Obama able to do during the final 6 years in office? He was able to use the tools for handling immigration that were available to him. And in many cases, those tools that were available to him were border security tools, right? They were the tools that went in the direction of what the Republicans wanted in a compromise on immigration reform, rather than in the direction of what Democrats might emphasize. So he was unable to move towards amnesty or a path to citizenship for people who had arrived in the country illegally, but he was able to implement a certain amount of heightened border security. So the Republicans, by doing nothing, got much of what they wanted on the issue of immigration without being forced to compromise at all. A few statistics to sort of put this into perspective. During the 8 years of Obama's administration, 3 million illegal immigrants were deported, compared to 2 million during the Bush administration. Okay, so many of immigration rights groups, many non-government organizations that promote the question of an equitable treatment of the issue of immigration in North America, have a harsh view of what Obama did during his 2 terms. He made promises that gave people hope on the campaign trail, and then he deported more than 1 million people more than the Bush administration had done before him. In addition, remember, the Latino electorate in the United States is by no means monolithic, right? Even the Mexican electorate in the US is by no means monolithic, right? You have a different type of Mexican community in Texas and in California. But you also have a Latino population which comes from the Caribbean, increasingly which comes from Central America these days, okay, and from places like Venezuela. And for Cubans and Venezuelans, but especially Cubans, right, that's the largest population of the largest, Latino population in Florida. These people tend to be sympathetic to the Republican Party on a certain number of political issues. Right? They tend to be highly opposed, for obvious reasons, to anything that resembles socialism in government. Right? So much more in favor of individual liberty than government programs, in line with the Republican Party, and tending to be conservative on a number of cultural issues as well. And Obama angered the Cuban population in his approach to immigration as well, when at the end of his term in office, he tried to begin normalizing relations with the Castro regime, and he ended what was called the wet feet, dry feet policy, which basically provided an open door, open entry into the United States for anyone who had managed to flee from Cuba. Right? There was no question about examining asylum requests for people who had arrived in the U.S. from Cuba. They were able to enter quite freely. Obama, in normalizing relations with Cuba, ends this wet feet, dry feet policy. Okay, so on both of these first 2 points, we see that Obama's administration was actually took a rather hard line to the issue of entry into the United States from the Caribbean, from Mexico, from Central America. The really progressive attitude that Obama takes on the question of immigration is in terms of the policy change that he promotes towards those who are already on American soil. And ultimately, the policy change towards those who are already on American soil that Obama is able to implement is an executive action. The DACA executive action, deferred action for childhood arrivals. This executive action shielded 750,000 people who Obama referred to as dreamers from deportation from the United States. So, unable to achieve comprehensive immigration reform by law through legislation, right, which would have to go through Congress, Obama is able to implement executive action, right, just an order from the president defining the way in which certain issues are to be handled by his administration. This order from the president defines the fact that these dreamers are not to be deported by immigrations and customs. Okay. I give a reference here to an article from a conservative-leaning organization, the Cato Institute, which offers a very concise summary of this question. This article concludes with the statement that President Obama's immigration legacy is mixed. His executive actions shielded hundreds of thousands from deportation, but he was also the most stringent enforcer of immigration laws in American history, earning him the title Deporter-in-Chief from the National Council of La Raza. Okay, so stringent enforcer of border security, and and in terms of dealing with people who were already on American soil, forced to act only very late in his presidency and through executive actions rather than legal reform. Obama wanted to make a compromise that would go through Congress, right? And he focused on these childhood arrivals because he thought it was a way of putting pressure on Republicans to compromise. These people were called dreamers because Obama pushed for a compromise on what would have been called the Dream Act. Okay, choosing the cases of these people who were brought to the United States as children, who came into the country illegally, but as children, who grew up in the United States, who were good citizens or on the path to being good citizens. By focusing on this group, Obama thought that he could get public opinion on his side and create the grounds for a compromise with the Republicans. The Republicans would not compromise. The Dream Act never became law, and so Obama was forced to resort to executive action, deferred action for childhood arrivals. Okay? So that's basically the concise summary of what Obama does on the issue of immigration. The question of immigration then explodes into public view as the major issue, perhaps one of the two or three major issues of the Trump presidency, because Trump focuses on illegal immigration, making Obama seem as though he were a president who was soft on the issue, which, as you've seen here, he was not. And Trump uses Obama's DACA action as kind of a bargaining chip in his in the way he worked with the Democratic Congress that he had for the second 2 years of his term. Right, he could threaten to end DACA if he didn't get funding for his border wall. Okay, so because Trump makes immigration such a central identity issue, really, for his wing of the Republican Party, and a central weapon for the way in which he deals with the Democratic Congress, immigration has become an increasingly major public issue since the end of Obama's term in office.